Speak, O Lord, this morning, for your servants are listening. Amen. I invite you to be seated this morning. In our gospel reading, we meet Jesus early in his ministry in Mark's gospel, encountering these Pharisees who are ever growing frustrated with him. Ultimately, after this encounter, as Mark tells us, they begin to conspire how to bring him down, how to destroy him, ultimately, how to kill him. And Jesus returns the frustration as he gets frustrated and angry with them. This is one of the 6 places in Mark's gospel where Jesus gets angry. And so we should pay attention. In these 2 Sabbath day encounters, what we witness is a collision of worlds, a conflict of a humanity ossified, hardened in its own righteousness, and a Lord, this God of the Sabbath, who is full of mercy and compassion all the way down. There are a few things we need to avoid if we're going to understand what's going on here in Mark's gospel, and they're fairly common misreadings. First, this is not a conflict between something like religion and relationship, where the Pharisees represent the outwardly religious and dutiful and ritualistic, and where Jesus is interested in the inner stuff of relationship and not the outer trappings of religion. This is not that. That would be too easy. That would be to misunderstand, misread the whole thing. The Sabbath was never not tradition. It was never not ritual and duty and careful religious observance. These are all good things, and what the Sabbath is, it was what God said to do, how to keep it holy. But the Sabbath is not for all of those things as ends in themselves. Otherwise, we could misunderstand and think that we are made for Sabbath observance, that we're made for tradition, we're made for ritual and duty and religious observance, full stop. But that's got it wrong. The Sabbath is not our end. It's not our goal. It's not what we're oriented toward. It is not what we are for. We are not for observing Sabbath. What we are for is God. God is our end. God is our goal. We are made for God, and God's Sabbath is made for us by God as a gift, so that we can remember what we're really made for, so that in rest and peace we can know that we are made for God and for God's love, mercy, and compassion, which Jesus gives in spades. We'll get to that in a minute. Second, we make a mistake if we think about these Pharisees as bad people. They often get this bad rap. They were not, in fact, bad people. In fact, they were good people. They were really good at what they did. They were good at observing Sabbath. They were really good at following what God had told them to do. They were professionals, if you will. They were upstanding members of society. Now, you may psychoanalyze this and think that I'm getting them off the hook this morning because I'm a religious professional. And that's probably partly true. But yet, the Pharisees were not wrong to uphold the Sabbath and to try to keep it holy. That's what God told them to do. They were right to do it. But in their rightness, they lost the plot. They forgot that the Sabbath was made for them, and that they were not made for the Sabbath, but they were made for so much more. Being right doesn't bring them closer to God. Being merciful and compassionate does. So here comes Jesus and his band of disciples walking along. They're traveling and they're hungry. They stop by some grain field and they start popping the heads off of the grain for a snack. Now, this action was adjacent to harvesting the grain. It was harvesting adjacent, and that constituted work, and work was not allowed on the Sabbath. And so the Pharisees, witnessing this, they cry foul. Hey, why do you think you're allowed to play fast and loose with the Sabbath? It needs to be kept holy. Jesus reminds them that someone no less than great King David also played fast and loose with the rules when he fed people with the consecrated bread reserved only for the priests. So if King David could do it, Jesus says, then certainly my disciples can be excused for plucking a few grains of wheat for a snack. Well, yeah, but that's King David, you might think. Is he actually comparing himself to David? Must be running through their minds, in their imaginations, and this is where Jesus pushes them and stretches their imaginations to the breaking point. He makes the bold claim not only that the Sabbath has been petrified into this immobile, inflexible burden, but even more, that he is in fact the Lord of the Sabbath, the one who gave it to Israel in the first place, and so he is the King of King David. And he gave it to them for their joy, not for their burden. You see, the Pharisees have every good intention, like you and me, I think. But in my experience, good intentions without clarity of purpose are dangerous. For the Pharisees, their good intentions have blinded them to the truth of what Sabbath is for, and so also to the truth of what they're made for. And they miss it. The Sabbath was never meant to be a hoop for people to jump through, but a gift of joy and rest, which mirrored God's rest and God's enjoyment of all of creation. And then, as if to drive the point home and to double down on his lordship of the Sabbath, Jesus seizes the opportunity to heal this man with a withered hand. It's as if he's using the opportunity to draw out a big, dramatic picture for them. Flannery O'Connor, the wonderful Southern Georgian novelist, was once asked why she used such graphic and dramatic action in her short stories. She responded, "To the hard of hearing, you shout, and for the almost blind, you draw large and startling figures." Well, this is Jesus drawing large and startling figures. This is Jesus shouting to the hard of hearing. This is Jesus shouting to me and to you. You see, the Sabbath is for rest and peace in creation. And in that rest and in that peace, justice, mercy, and compassion are clarified and sharpened, not set aside. In fact, it's because the Pharisees have hardened their hearts to the compassion and mercy of God as the beating heart of Sabbath that Jesus gets angry. Jesus gets angry. His anger is rooted in compassion and mercy, rooted in the righteousness of God. He is angry at the injustice of what Sabbath has become. And the hard of hearing and the short-sighted in turn react with frustration. And they conspire about how to destroy him, ultimately how to kill him. And their frustration and their anger in this is rooted in fear. His anger is rooted in mercy and compassion. Two worlds colliding. Two very different things. So the question in the text is not or ever what's wrong with these Pharisees, but what's wrong with me? What's wrong with us? It's a hard text because it holds us to the fire of God's justice. What have we here and now hardened at our own peril? What mortal, broken thing have we deified and worshipped instead of compassion and mercy? Who or what have we stopped seeing because our eyes have been blinded by our very best intentions? To whom or to what have our own hearts become hard? We are a people called to follow this Jesus of the Sabbath, this Lord of the Sabbath, this giver of the Sabbath, who is at work in this world, leading us to people and to places that need the mercy, compassion, and justice of God. These may be people and places we have been blinded to by our own best intentions, but people and places to which Jesus will, if we follow him, bring us. And bring along with us and through us his mercy to bear. Which is why I'm glad that we're celebrating one of our ministry partners this morning in Stonegate Ministries. We've been partnered with Stonegate in this community for decades as Christ's mercy and compassion and justice is extended to the most vulnerable in our communities, in our neighborhoods, to those withered by hunger and circumstance. We'll hear a little bit more about what Stonegate is doing and how we can continue to be involved at the end of the service this morning. But this collision of worlds between this humanity hardened into itself and its own righteousness and the righteousness of God that acts in mercy, compassion, and justice is not something that only happens in the text there and then in Mark's gospel. It is what Paul calls the war of the flesh and spirit. It's the collision of worlds in our own hearts, in my heart, in your heart. And so as we come and gather at Christ's table once again this morning, I pray for a softening of my heart. I pray for a softening of your heart. I pray that we would come and be open to where Jesus is leading us to show his mercy and compassion, that we might step out in faith and follow him. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to this Lord of the Sabbath. Amen.